When Gregory Blackwood finally cried for the first time in 15 years, his tears fell on the muzzle of a blind horse that had not only transformed the life of a homeless man, but also revealed the true blindness of a millionaire who thought he saw everything. 3 months before that moment of surrender, Gregory was walking through the marble halls of his mansion in Lakeside Estates, planning what would be his most elaborate joke. The 52-year-old businessman, owner of a fortune built on horse farms, real estate, and logistics companies, had a peculiar and cruel hobby, turning the misfortune of others into entertainment for his social circle. It was a Tuesday morning when his stable manager called with news that to any normal person would be sad. One of the recently acquired horses, a chestnut Arabian thoroughbred, had arrived completely blind due to the mistreatment suffered on the previous farm. The animal, which the handlers had already nicknamed Brute for its imposing presence even in adversity, would be a $15,000 loss. But Gregory didn't see a loss. He saw an opportunity. "A blind horse," he murmured, twirling the gold ring on his finger as a wicked idea took shape. What a generous gift for someone who has nothing to lose. That night, during a dinner at his exclusive club, Gregory presented his new prank to his friends. They were all men like him, rich, bored, and addicted to the feeling of superiority they experienced when ridiculing the less fortunate. They had a game they called comedic charity. They competed to see who could help someone in the most absurd way possible, creating embarrassing situations to later laugh at the expense of others' naivete. Imagine the poor guy's face when he finds out he won a horse that can't see. Gregory laughed, cutting a piece of ribeye steak. He'll think he won the lottery until he tries to ride it. Laughter echoed through the private room, but there was something different in the air that night. Maybe it was the wine, maybe Gregory's growing need to surpass his own previous cruelties, but he felt that this joke needed to be special. He needed to find the perfect victim. That's when he remembered Oscar. Oscar Mendez had appeared on the streets of the downtown area about a year earlier, when Gregory occasionally passed by on his way to meetings. The 47-year-old man was always in the same place, a vacant lot near the overpass, where he had improvised a shelter with tarps and cardboard. Unlike other homeless people Gregory had used in his games, Oscar maintained a dignity that irritated the millionaire. Even in his condition, the man greeted those who passed by, helped others in need, and never aggressively asked for money. There was something about Oscar's posture that deeply bothered Gregory. Maybe it was the fact that, even after losing everything, the man hadn't lost his humanity, and that, to someone who believed that money was the only thing that separated the winners from the losers, was a personal affront. Oscar hadn't been born on the streets. 7 years earlier, he had owned a small auto repair shop in rural São Paulo. Married to Marisa for 20 years, father of a teenage son named Robert, his life was simple but full. He woke up early, worked with his hands, returned home where he was greeted with his wife's smile and his son's school achievements. The downfall began with Marisa's sudden death from a pulmonary embolism. Devastated, Oscar began to drink to numb the pain. 6 months later, Robert died in a motorcycle accident. He was returning from school when he was hit by a drunk driver. In less than a year, Oscar had lost all reason to live. The shop, without his previous dedication, began to fail. Customers drifted away, employees quit, and debts accumulated. Oscar sold everything he had to pay off his commitments, but it wasn't enough. Alcohol had become his only companion, and it was a terrible financial advisor. When he lost his house, Oscar had nowhere to go. With no close family, and with his few friends embarrassed by the situation, he found himself walking the streets with an old backpack and the clothes on his back. At first, he believed it would be temporary. He would find a job, rent a room, rebuild his life. But the world isn't kind to middle-aged men without a fixed address. Rejected in dozens of interviews, humiliated by overworked social workers, and ignored by the distant family who considered him a failure, Oscar gradually accepted his new reality. The streets became his home, and he learned the rules of survival: where to find food, which places were safe to sleep, how to protect himself from the cold and rain. But Oscar kept something that life hadn't been able to steal from him, his ability to see the suffering of others and try to alleviate it. Even without having anything, he shared what little he could with other homeless people in even worse situations. He comforted those who cried, protected those who were weaker, and maintained a flame of hope that he himself didn't understand where it came from. It was a cloudy Thursday in June when Gregory decided to put his plan into action. He put on a simpler suit, took his less flashy Mercedes, and drove to the stables to pick up Brute. The horse, even blind, was majestic. Its chestnut coat shone with the care it received, and its musculature denoted its noble lineage. Only its glassy, unfocused eyes revealed its disability. "Today you'll meet your new owner," Gregory said to the animal as he loaded it into the van. "A man who will appreciate you as much as you will appreciate the new life you will have." The sarcasm dripped from every word. When he arrived at the vacant lot where Oscar usually stayed, Gregory found the man sitting next to a small fire, watching the flames dance. There was something meditative about the scene that, for a moment, almost made the millionaire hesitate. "Almost. Good afternoon," Gregory said, adopting a falsely cordial tone. "You're Oscar, right? I've heard of you." Oscar looked up, surprised. It wasn't common to receive visits from well-dressed men at his address. "Yes, sir, that's me. Can I help you with something?" The polite response irritated Gregory. How could someone in such misery offer help? "Actually, I came to bring you something. A gift." It was then that Gregory led Brute from the van. The horse, even blind, seemed to sense the change of environment. His nostrils flared, taking in new scents, and he softly snorted. "This horse is yours now," Gregory announced, barely able to contain his laughter. "An Arabian thoroughbred must be worth $15,000 easily." Oscar slowly stood, unable to believe what he saw. He approached the animal cautiously, extending a hand to touch its muzzle. Brute didn't move, but his nostrils twitched at the gentle touch. "Sir, this is very generous, but why are you doing this?" Oscar asked, genuinely confused. "Let's just say, it's my way of giving back to the community," Gregory replied, savoring every second of the situation. "There's just one small detail I forgot to mention. He's, how can I say, a little different." It was then that Oscar realized. He moved his hand in front of the horse's eyes, lit a lighter near the animal's face. Brute didn't react to any visual stimulus. He was completely blind. Gregory expected to see disappointment, perhaps anger. He expected Oscar to yell, to complain about the cruel prank, but what he saw was something he hadn't anticipated: understanding. "Oh, I understand," Oscar said softly, stroking Brute's neck. "You and I have something in common, don't we, buddy? The world thinks we're good for nothing." The reaction caught Gregory off guard. Where was the humiliation, the revolt, the despair that would fuel his stories at the club? "Well," the millionaire stammered, "I hope you enjoy each other's company." And he left laughing, but it was a forced laugh. There was something about Oscar's serenity that disturbed him. That night, alone in the vacant lot with a blind horse, Oscar faced a monumental practical dilemma: how to care for an animal of that size without resources, without adequate shelter, without veterinary knowledge. Logic dictated refusing the gift, finding someone who could better care for Brute. But when he looked into the horse's sightless eyes, Oscar saw a reflection of himself. Two beings discarded by the world, considered worthless, united by chance and the cruelty of others. "You know what, Brute?" he said, using the name he'd heard Gregory mention. "Maybe we can help each other. You give me company, I give you protection. It won't be easy, but when have our lives ever been easy?" During the first few days, Oscar used all his creativity and survival experience to adapt his makeshift shelter to Brute's needs. With wood found in dumpsters and tarps donated by local merchants, he built a larger structure that could protect the horse from rain and wind. Food was an even greater challenge. Oscar shared his food with Brute, but knew it wasn't enough. He began to wander the city, looking for leftover vegetables and fruits at markets, leftover bread from bakeries, anything that could nourish his new companion. It was during these expeditions that something unexpected began to happen. People noticed Oscar in a different way. A man caring for a blind horse on the streets attracted attention in a way that a simple homeless man couldn't. The first was an 8-year-old girl named Sophia, who passed by every day on her way to school. She stopped to observe Brute and asked her father why the horse didn't look at her. When Oscar explained about the animal's blindness, Sophia returned the next day with a carrot she had asked her mother for. "It's for the horsey," she said, extending the small carrot. "My grandma said carrots are good for your eyes." Oscar accepted the gift with tears in his eyes. How long had it been since he had received a genuine gesture of kindness? Soon other children began to appear. Then came the parents, curious about this strange duo. A thoroughbred horse being cared for by a homeless man was a story that sparked interest and gradually compassion. Then Camila Ferreira appeared in their lives. Camila was a 35-year-old veterinarian who worked at a clinic in the neighboring neighborhood. She had heard about Oscar and Brute from a client who had passed by the vacant lot and been intrigued by the situation. As a volunteer at several animal protection NGOs, Camila decided to investigate. When she arrived at the site one Saturday morning, she found Oscar brushing Brute with an old brush he had found in the trash. The care, the patience, the obvious affection between man and animal deeply impressed her. "Hello," she said, approaching slowly. "I'm a veterinarian. Can I examine your horse?" Oscar, initially suspicious, he knew that authorities might try to separate him from Brute, gradually calmed down with Camila's genuine concern. She examined the animal carefully, checked his general health, and analyzed his damaged eyes. "He's well cared for," she concluded, surprised. "Considering the circumstances, you're doing an exceptional job." "He's all I have," Oscar replied simply, "and I'm all he has." That sentence touched Camila deeply. That night she couldn't stop thinking about the situation. A homeless man dedicating every ounce of his energy and limited resources to caring for an animal that anyone would consider a burden. It was a lesson in unconditional love that most people never learn. It was then that Camila made a decision that would change everything. She took a photo of Oscar and Brute with his permission and wrote a heartfelt post about the story she'd uncovered. She posted it on her social media with the hashtag #BlindHorseHomelessMan, asking the community for help for these two beings who had found each other amidst abandonment. The post went viral in a way nobody expected. In 24 hours, the story had been shared thousands of times. People from all over the town, then the state, started to mobilize. Donations of feed, building materials, blankets, and veterinary medicine began to arrive. Volunteers showed up offering to help build a better shelter for Brute. But the most surprising thing was the emotional response of people. Hundreds of comments from people who identified with Oscar's story, who saw in Brute a symbol of resilience, who found hope in that unlikely friendship. If a homeless man can care for a blind horse with so much love, what does that say about our own excuses for not helping each other? One user wrote, "Within a week, Oscar and Brute had a small barn built by volunteers on the vacant lot, which had been officially granted by the city for the project. Social assistance NGOs contacted them, offering help to get Oscar documents, medical treatment, and even job opportunities." This is where our story finds a perfect moment for a reflective pause. If you're following this journey of transformation, if you're moved by the strength of the unconditional love between Oscar and Brute, then you need to subscribe to this channel right now. Stories like this, which show the power of humanity in the face of adversity, are what we share here regularly. Real narratives that restore our faith in humankind and remind us that small gestures can create big transformations. Don't miss the next stories that will touch your heart in the same way. Meanwhile, on the other side of town, Gregory watched the unfolding events with mixed feelings. At first he laughed at the irony. His joke had turned into a comedic charity campaign. But as the story gained national proportions, appearing on television news and newspapers, his discomfort began to grow. It was then that one of his partners, Robert Alvarenga, commented during a meeting, "Did you see that story about the homeless man and the blind horse? What an example of a human being, isn't it?" Taking care of an animal in his situation, Gregory just mumbled an agreement, but inside he was seething. How had his victim become a national hero? The turning point came 3 weeks after the story went viral. During a business lunch, Gregory couldn't contain himself when the subject came up again. With a few glasses of wine in him, he boasted, "You want to know the truth? I gave that horse to the beggar." It was a joke that got out of hand. The silence at the table was awkward. Robert Alvarenga, known for his seriousness and ethical values, couldn't hide his disgust. "A joke," he repeated, incredulous. "You gave a blind horse to a homeless man as a joke." "Relax, Robert. In the end, everything worked out, didn't it? The guy became a celebrity." But Robert didn't relax. As a member of the board of several NGOs, and known for his social actions, he was deeply shocked by the revelation. That same afternoon, he called Camila, who had become the unofficial spokesperson for Oscar and Brute's story. When Camila learned of the true origin of the gift, she felt a mixture of anger and sadness. Anger at the cruelty of the original intention, sadness at imagining how Oscar would feel upon discovering that he had been the target of a cruel joke. She decided to confront Gregory before telling anything to Oscar. The meeting took place in Gregory's office on a rainy Tuesday. Camila entered determined, but when she saw the man behind the mahogany desk, she felt more pity than anger. There was something deeply empty in those eyes that all the wealth couldn't fill. "So you're the generous man who donated Brute to Oscar," she said without hiding the sarcasm. "Look, doctor, I didn't expect things to get this big. It was just a joke." "A joke?" Camila leaned forward. "Do you know Oscar's story? Do you know what he's been through?" Gregory shook his head negatively. "He lost his wife and only child. He lost everything he had. He's been on the streets for 7 years. And you thought it would be funny to give him a blind horse so you could laugh at his reaction." For the first time, Gregory felt something he hadn't experienced in years, genuine shame. When the situation was abstract, any beggar was easy to dehumanize, to turn into an object of ridicule, but to hear the real story, to understand that behind that man there were unimaginable losses. "I didn't know," he mumbled. "You didn't know because you didn't care to know. For you, he was just a convenient target for your cruelty." Camila got up to leave, but at the door she turned. "The worst thing is that your joke ended up saving 2 lives. Oscar found a purpose, and Brute found someone who loves him. Despite your evil, something beautiful was born. That says a lot about them and a lot about you." In the weeks that followed the conversation with Camila, Gregory's life crumbled in a way similar to Oscar's years before. But for completely opposite reasons. Robert Alvarenga, disturbed by the revelation, couldn't keep it a secret. The story of the true origin of the donation leaked to the press. The scandal was devastating. "Millionaire uses homeless man as a guinea pig in a cruel joke," screamed the headlines. Companies that did business with Gregory broke contracts, clients backed away, and his reputation, built over decades, vanished in a matter of days. For the first time in his life, Gregory experienced something he never thought possible: being rejected. His wealth unable to buy him anything. Friends avoided him, social invitations ceased, and he found himself isolated in his marble mansion, which suddenly felt more like a gilded cage. It was in this moment of complete solitude that Gregory made a surprising decision. He decided to visit Oscar. On a gray August afternoon, he drove to the vacant lot that now housed a small but well-maintained barn. Signs indicated the Blind Horse Homeless Man Project, and dozens of people milled about, some taking pictures, others bringing donations. Gregory parked at a safe distance and observed. There was Oscar, clean, in new donated clothes, but still with the same serenity that had disturbed him months before. He guided visitors to Brute, told the story, and thanked for donations with a genuine humility that contrasted sharply with the arrogance Gregory had displayed all his life. When he finally approached, several volunteers recognized him. There were whispers, disapproving glances, a palpable tension in the air. But Oscar, who was brushing Brute, simply looked up and said, "Good afternoon, Mr. Blackwood." The simplicity of the greeting completely disarmed Gregory. There was no anger, no accusation, just acknowledgement. Gregory struggled to find words. "I came to apologize." "For what?" asked Oscar, continuing to brush Brute. "For the joke. For using you. For giving Brute with bad intentions." Oscar stopped brushing and looked directly at Gregory. "Do you think I didn't know?" The question caught the millionaire off guard. "What do you mean?" "Mr. Blackwood, a rich man doesn't give a $15,000 horse to a homeless man out of kindness. I knew there was something behind it. But you know what I discovered. It doesn't matter what your intention was. What matters is what Brute and I did with what we received." Oscar approached Brute, who immediately rested his head on the man's shoulder. "He can't see the world, but he can feel love. I lost everything I had, but I found a purpose. Sometimes, the things we receive in bad faith serve to teach us what we haven't yet learned." Gregory felt something breaking inside his chest. For years he had used his wealth as a weapon, his social position as a shield against any questioning of his values. But there, before a man who had lost everything and yet maintained his dignity, before a blind horse who had become a symbol of hope, he finally saw what he truly was: empty. "How can you not hate me?" he asked, his voice cracking. "Hate is a luxury I can't afford," Oscar replied. "I have a horse to care for, people who help me to thank, a new life to build. There's no time left for resentment." It was at that moment that Gregory cried for the first time in 15 years. He didn't cry for the lost business, the ruined reputation, the friends who abandoned him. He cried for the person he had become, for the opportunities for kindness he had wasted, for the years he had lived thinking he was seeing everything when in fact he was blinder than Brute. His tears fell on the horse's muzzle, which, even without seeing, seemed to understand that something important was happening. Brute snorted softly, a sound that almost sounded like forgiveness. Oscar put his hand on Gregory's shoulder. "Do you really want to help? For real this time?" Gregory nodded affirmatively, unable to speak. "Then come here tomorrow morning. Brute needs medication for a hoof infection, and I need someone to hold him while Dr. Camila does the dressing. Can you lend a hand?" The question was simple, but full of meaning. Gregory nodded again. Then it settled. 7 in the morning. In the months that followed, an unexpected routine was established. Gregory showed up every day at the Blind Horse Homeless Man Project, not as a millionaire benefactor handing out money to ease his conscience, but as a volunteer willing to work. He cleaned the stable, helped feed Brute, organized donations, and gradually learned to do it all without seeking recognition or gratitude. At first, other volunteers and visitors treated him with justifiable coldness. But Oscar, with his simple wisdom, had established a rule. Here, only what you do today matters. Yesterday is gone. Tomorrow hasn't arrived yet. Slowly, Gregory rediscovered aspects of himself that he had buried under decades of cynicism and greed. He discovered that he had a way with animals, that he could organize resources efficiently when the goal was to help, that there was a deep satisfaction in well-done manual labor. More importantly, he began to listen to the stories of the other volunteers and visitors. He met Maria, a retired woman who donated half of her small pension to the project because Bruto reminds me that disability is not the end of the world. He met John, a teenager from the suburbs, who walked 2 hours every weekend to help because Oscar taught me that we can choose to help even when nobody helps us. Each story was a lesson in humanity that his life of privilege had never offered him. The moment of greatest transformation came 6 months after that first visit. The Blind Horse Homeless Man Project had grown so much that it had acquired a larger plot of land and a more adequate structure. It was moving day, and all the volunteers were helping to transport the materials. Gregory was carrying a sack of feed when he tripped and fell, scattering the food on the ground. In other times, he would have yelled at someone, blamed someone else, used his position to avoid any embarrassment. But that day, He simply laughed at himself and began to gather the scattered grains. "It happens to anyone," said Oscar, bending down to help. "A year ago I would have fired someone for that," admitted Gregory. "And today I learned that even a millionaire can stumble." Oscar smiled. "Do you know the difference between stumbling and falling?" "What?" "When you stumble, you get up. When you fall, someone needs to help you up. You spent your life stumbling and thinking you were falling." That night, at the project's new facility, a small opening ceremony took place. Nothing formal, just the volunteers, some local residents, and of course, Oscar and Brute as the main honorees. Camila, who had become close friends with Oscar and was the project's veterinary coordinator, gave a short speech. This place was born from an act of cruelty that transformed into a symbol of hope, proof that unconditional love can transform any situation, no matter how difficult it may seem. She looked directly at Gregory, and proof that it's never too late to choose to be a better person. Gregory said nothing, but for the first time in months he smiled. A genuine smile, not the calculated smile he used in negotiations or social gatherings. As everyone said their goodbyes that night, Gregory approached Brute one last time. The horse, who already knew him by scent and voice, nuzzled his hand. "Thank you, my friend," Gregory whispered. "You taught me to see." Oscar, who was putting away the last few things, overheard. "He really does have that power. Brute sees with his heart, and his heart is too big to hold on to resentment." "How did you learn that?" Gregory asked. "By losing everything," Oscar replied simply. "When you have nothing left to protect, there's room to love." 2 years later, the Brute Project had become a national reference in social rehabilitation and animal-assisted therapy. What began as a makeshift shelter for a blind horse had evolved into a full-fledged center serving dozens of vulnerable people, always with Brute as the symbolic heart of the project. Gregory had sold 2 of his properties to fund the expansion, but not as a grand gesture of charity. He insisted that no one know the source of the funds, preferring the money to arrive through anonymous donations. He had learned from Oscar that true generosity doesn't need an audience. His personal life had also changed drastically. The mansion in Lakeside Estates was sold, and he moved to a simple apartment near the project. Not out of financial necessity, he was still a wealthy man, but because he discovered that smaller spaces suited the person he was becoming. Former friends from the exclusive club occasionally encountered him on the street and made sarcastic comments about his charitable phase. Gregory listened in silence, remembering that he himself had once thought that way about people who dedicated time to social causes. "Don't you miss the old life?" Robert Alvarenga, who had become a discreet supporter of the project after witnessing Gregory's transformation, once asked him. Outside, Brute grazed peacefully under the stars. His eyes couldn't see the beauty of the night, but his whole being radiated a peace that touched anyone who came near. He had become more than a pet or even a symbol. He was a silent teacher of acceptance, unconditional love, and purpose. In the years that followed, many other stories unfolded at the Brute Project. Teenagers in conflict with the law found direction caring for animals. Lonely elderly people discovered a family in the community of volunteers. People with depression found motivation in the routine of caring for the animals that the project came to house. For Brute, over time, gained the company of other animals with disabilities or trauma. But the core story always remained a blind horse who taught 2 lost men to see, a millionaire who discovered that true wealth doesn't reside in bank accounts, but in genuine human connections, a homeless man who proved that dignity and purpose don't depend on address or bank balance, and at the center of it all, Brute, who never regained his physical sight, but who became the eyes through which dozens of people learned to see the world with more compassion, more hope, more love. On a particularly clear morning, 5 years after that first encounter in the vacant lot, Gregory arrived at the project and found Oscar sitting beside Brute, simply observing the movement of life around them, children playing, volunteers working, other animals grazing in the field. "What are you thinking about?" Gregory asked, sitting down beside his friend. I was thinking life is funny, Oscar replied. I lost everything I thought was important. Wife, son, house, job. You almost lost everything because you were a person who didn't like himself. And in the end, it was a blind horse who taught us to see. And what do we see now? Oscar smiled, stroking Brute's neck. We see that no matter how dark the path, there's always a way to find the light. We see that love doesn't need a reason to exist. We see that every ending can be a new beginning, if we're willing to start over. And we see that sometimes, added Gregory, the greatest blessings come disguised as the worst misfortunes. Brute, as if understanding they were talking about him, nuzzled close to the two men. His sightless eyes reflected all the silent wisdom he had accumulated in his years, the understanding that seeing isn't just a function of the eyes, but a capacity of the heart. And there, in that simple moment of an ordinary morning, three beings whom life had wounded in different ways, silently celebrated the most important discovery anyone can make, that unconditional love has the power to transform any situation, however difficult it may seem, into an opportunity for growth, connection, and hope. Brute never regained his sight, but ironically, he was the one who taught two men, one who lived in the shadows of society, the other who thought he saw everything from the top of his ivory tower, to see the world with truly new eyes.